What happens when the most powerful political figure on the planet issues a direct, uncompromising order, and an allied nation simply looks him in the eye and says no? You are watching the live, real-time collapse of American unipolar dominance, and the mainstream media is absolutely terrified to tell you the truth. Just moments ago, a geopolitical earthquake struck the northern border of the United States, shattering a decades-old alliance and rewriting the rules of global trade. Donald Trump, leveraging unparalleled political pressure, demanded the immediate total blockade of the continent's most critical international bridge. The mandate was designed to be absolute: shut down the asphalt, choke off the international supply lines, and force Ottawa to completely bend the knee. But Canada did not just refuse this historic ultimatum. They deliberately defied Washington, threw the heavy steel barricades aside, and ordered the bridge wide open for global business. Right now, the cargo is flowing. The massive freight trucks are moving, and the White House is completely paralyzed, exposed as totally powerless to stop it. Think about what you are witnessing right here, right now. I want to ask you directly, has Washington fundamentally lost its iron grip on its own continental backyard? Or is there a deeper, much darker political trap being set right before our eyes? This is not a petty localized border dispute over minor tariffs or trucking routes. This is a public, humiliating destruction of American leverage, and it is going to trigger a catastrophic economic shockwave that is heading straight for your bank account. Do not look away, because the geopolitical order of North America just fractured permanently, and your daily life is caught right in the crossfire. To understand why this specific bridge is the flashpoint of the century, you need to look far past the political theater and follow the invisible money. The political establishment wants you to think this is just a clash of egos, but the raw data tells a terrifyingly different story. This act of open defiance is the direct result of three massive silent global shifts colliding all at once. First, we have to look at the ruthless shadow war currently raging over critical rare earth minerals. For decades, the United States treated the massive lithium, cobalt, and nickel deposits buried beneath the Canadian Shield as its own personal strategic reserve. But over the last 36 months, Ottawa has been quietly and aggressively rewriting its global trade alliances. They have deliberately bypassed American refineries, signing massive independent supply contracts directly with European and Indo-Pacific partners. Trump's aggressive push to lock down this specific bridge was never actually about standard national security or border control. It was a desperate, heavy-handed maneuver to physically bottleneck Canadian exports and force those critical minerals back into the American supply chain. So let me ask you, do you believe a superpower should have the right to completely dictate its neighbors' resources for the sake of continental security? Or is Canada totally justified in breaking free from an American monopoly? But the rabbit hole goes much deeper than just lithium and cobalt. This brings us to the second massive shift: the quiet, calculated, and relentless death of the petrodollar's absolute global supremacy. As alternative financial architectures rise globally, Canada has recognized the fatal vulnerability of its current economic model. Tying its entire economic survival to a polarized, deeply unpredictable American political system is no longer viewed as a safe bet in Ottawa. By forcing the bridge open against direct orders, Ottawa is flashing a massive, undeniable neon sign to global markets everywhere. They are proving that Canadian logistics and natural resources are completely immune to Washington's domestic political turbulence. Finally, you absolutely cannot ignore the rapid, heavily armed militarization of the Arctic Circle. This bridge standoff is actually a proxy war for dominance over the melting North. If Washington can legally and physically dictate the infrastructure of the southern Canadian border, they set the legal precedent to control the newly opening Arctic shipping lanes. Canada's absolute refusal to shut down the crossing is a preemptive strike to secure total, uncompromised sovereignty. The American intelligence apparatus saw this coming from miles away, and they panicked. This was supposed to be a flawless, overwhelming show of strength to remind the world who runs North America. Instead, the global chessboard just flipped and the pieces are scattering everywhere. This is not a random diplomatic breakdown or a sudden miscommunication. It is a ruthless, highly calculated chess match played by international heavyweights. At the absolute center of this storm is Donald Trump, operating on an aggressive America First strategy designed to reassert total dominance over North American trade. His faction calculated that sheer economic gravity and the terrifying threat of total isolation would force the Canadian administration to instantly collapse and comply. They assumed that no Canadian politician would ever dare risk the wrath of the American consumer market. But they deeply, fundamentally miscalculated the shifting psychology of Ottawa's new political and industrial elite. The Canadian administration, backed by a quiet coalition of powerful corporate titans, has spent the last 5 years quietly building massive logistical redundancies. They stress-tested their supply chains specifically to survive this exact type of American economic extortion. They did not flinch for a single second when the blockade order came, because they already had the counterstrike loaded and ready to fire. But who is really running this high-stakes game? I want you to think critically about this. Do you honestly think the elected politicians in front of the cameras are making these decisions? Or are massive, unelected global corporations pulling the strings from the shadows? Because the European Union is watching this bridge with absolute, unwavering laser focus. European diplomats have been engaging in intense back-channel negotiations, quietly promising Ottawa financial immunity. They guaranteed that if Washington attempted a full economic siege, the European Union would instantly buy all displaced Canadian exports. Europe practically handed Canada the financial shield needed to publicly defy the White House. And then there is the silent, terrifying reality of the American military-industrial complex. The Pentagon relies entirely on highly integrated cross-border supply chains to build everything from advanced smart munitions to next-generation stealth fighters. While political factions scream for a blockade to satisfy populist optics, the Pentagon generals are quietly terrified. A closed bridge means American defense contractors simply cannot build weapons. This internal civil war is the real reason the White House is suddenly powerless. They cannot physically enforce the bridge closure without completely crippling their own military supply chain and sparking a massive national security crisis. Canada meticulously mapped the vulnerabilities of the American defense sector and weaponized them brilliantly. They knew exactly where the weak points were, and they exploited them without hesitation. Now, let us bring this massive theoretical global power struggle directly to your kitchen table. You might sit there and think, a border crossing thousands of miles away does not affect you, but you are about to feel this geopolitical failure right in your wallet. The open defiance at the border has instantly permanently destroyed the concept of a safe, stable North American supply chain. When a multi-billion-dollar trade artery is politically weaponized out of nowhere, the free market goes into a blind, uncontrollable panic. Look closely at the automotive and advanced manufacturing sectors. Because the basic political stability of the border is gone, major corporations are currently panic-buying inventory and hoarding vital parts. This sudden artificial scarcity is going to drive up the cost of both new and used vehicles exponentially within the next 90 days. But it gets much, much more personal when you walk into a grocery store to feed your family. Massive amounts of fresh produce, essential fertilizers, and agricultural staples rely entirely on that bridge remaining open and undisputed. With the sudden looming threat of massive political blockades, commercial freight insurance has skyrocketed overnight. Major trucking companies are now demanding massive hazard pay and delay compensation just to drive anywhere near the northern border. This means the core cost of transporting your food has effectively doubled in a matter of hours. I need you to answer this in the comments. How high do you think inflation will actually go when the basic cost of moving a single tomato across a bridge triples in a matter of days? Furthermore, Your monthly utility bills are directly in the crosshairs of this conflict. The highly integrated cross-border energy grid is now officially viewed by Wall Street as politically unstable. Energy speculators are already actively betting on localized blackouts, driving up the baseline cost of heating and cooling across the entire northern United States. We are literally witnessing the sudden death of foreign direct investment in North America. Billions of dollars in planned infrastructure upgrades and factory expansions are being frozen right now as we speak. You are going to be heavily taxed by supply chain inflation, brutally squeezed by soaring energy costs, and threatened by a deeply terrified job market. Your entire cost of living is the direct casualty of a silent resource war you never even voted for. But if you think this economic nightmare gracefully stops at the borders of North America, you are gravely mistaken. While the White House and Ottawa are locked in this bitter, unprecedented standoff, the rest of the world is not just blindly watching. They are actively, aggressively moving their heaviest pieces on the global board. Look directly at the BRICS nations, specifically the calculated silence coming out of Beijing and Moscow right now. For the last decade, rival superpowers have been desperately trying to fracture the historically unified front of North American trade. This massive bridge crisis is the exact geopolitical gift they have been praying for. Within mere hours of Canada forcing the barricades open, back-channel communications between Ottawa and massive eastern markets reached an absolute fever pitch. Global competitors are currently offering Canada unlimited tariff-free access to their massive consumer bases, just to spite the United States. They are actively dangling multi-billion-dollar infrastructure loans specifically designed to bypass American logistics entirely and link Canadian ports directly to Asia. I want to ask you a very serious, highly uncomfortable question. Do you think Canada will actually pivot toward the East, or are they just using these foreign powers as the ultimate leverage against Washington? This is exactly how massive empires fall. Not by a sudden foreign invasion, but by deep internal fracturing that allows rival powers to easily slip through the cracks. Russia is also quietly, ruthlessly capitalizing on this exact moment of American weakness. With Washington completely distracted and humiliated by a massive logistics crisis on its own northern border, Moscow is aggressively expanding its military presence in the Arctic. They know the Pentagon simply cannot afford to fight a two-front geopolitical war right now. If the American military is structurally paralyzed by a broken, unpredictable supply chain with Canada, they cannot effectively project overwhelming power into the Eastern Hemisphere. This single broken diplomatic bridge has instantly degraded the global deterrent capability of the United States Armed Forces. The international community is smelling real blood in the water. Nations in South America and Africa who have historically relied on the U.S. dollar and American trade protection are currently holding emergency financial summits. They are looking at Washington's complete inability to control its closest, oldest, and most deeply integrated ally. And they are asking themselves a terrifying paradigm-shifting question. If America cannot even dictate terms to Canada, why should anyone else fear American economic sanctions? To fully grasp the true magnitude of this event, you have to look at the covert currency war happening simultaneously in the shadows. As Canada heavily shifts its trade routes away from the paralyzed American borders, they are also actively shifting how they settle those massive international trades. Rumors are currently flooding Wall Street that Ottawa is quietly exploring non-dual settlement mechanisms for their raw material exports. If Canada, historically America's largest trading partner, officially begins accepting alternative currencies for its critical minerals, the petrodollar system will sustain a fatal, unrecoverable blow. This is precisely why the global central bankers are in an absolute state of sheer panic behind closed doors. They are watching the absolute foundational pillar of Western financial dominance crumble over a simple stretch of concrete and steel. The next 30 days are going to be a brutal masterclass in covert economic warfare. The White House, deeply embarrassed on the world stage, simply cannot afford to let this public humiliation go unanswered. But because they cannot formally shut the bridge without destroying their own defense industry, they will launch a devastating asymmetrical attack. Within the next 2 weeks, expect to see the American regulatory state suddenly weaponized like never before. U.S. border agencies will implement massive unannounced safety and compliance inspections designed to slow Canadian commercial traffic to a torturous, agonizing crawl. It will be a crippling de facto blockade expertly disguised as standard bureaucratic red tape. In retaliation, Canada will absolutely fire back, and they will aim for the heart of the American economy. Watch very closely for Ottawa to suddenly pause critical environmental permits for American oil and gas transit pipelines currently crossing their territory. This calculated move will cause brief, highly violent spikes in localized fuel prices across America. The diplomatic rhetoric will become incredibly toxic, with thinly veiled threats of pooled intelligence sharing agreements deliberately leaking to the press. We confidently forecast a sharp sudden drop in the stock prices of heavily integrated North American logistics and auto parts companies. Within exactly 30 days, a coalition of absolutely terrified Fortune 500 CEOs will force an emergency closed-door summit between the two nations. They will demand an immediate ceasefire before the entire continental manufacturing base completely seizes up. A fragile, highly scripted truce will eventually be announced. But do not believe the media spin for a second. The core trust is irreparably broken, and the golden era of seamless North American integration is officially dead. The grand illusion of absolute American dominance just evaporated into the cold northern air. Canada boldly called the ultimate bluff, forced the bridge open, and definitively proved that the geopolitical rules of the 20th century simply no longer apply. The true horrifying cost of this historic standoff is not measured in delayed shipments. It is measured in the permanent destruction of continental trust. We have entered a highly dangerous new era of ruthless resource nationalism, and you are standing right on the bleeding front lines. The political establishment desperately wants you to go back to sleep and blindly believe this is just a temporary diplomatic glitch. But the global chessboard has been fundamentally, permanently reset, and your financial future is the ultimate collateral damage. I need to hear your unfiltered voice on this absolute historic failure. Who do you truly believe won this brutal power struggle? The political leaders making the demands, or the mega corporations manipulating the supply chains behind the scenes? And more importantly, do you think America is irreversibly losing its grip as a unipolar superpower? Or is this just a minor temporary setback in a much larger game? Drop your raw, honest opinions in the comments below right now. Hit the like button if you completely refuse to accept the mainstream media's watered-down narrative, and subscribe to Outward Truth to ensure you always stay one step ahead of the collapse. Stay vigilant, stay prepared, and always remember the truth is outward.